Bitcoin is close to becoming worthless.
Let's go. Now, what's the Bitcoin?
Bitcoin's like rat poison.
Yeah. Oh.
The greatest scam in history.
Let's get it.
Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
Yeah.
All right, you ungovernable misfits. I'm your host, Max. Everybody knows that Bitcoin is useless, worthless, and doomed to fail. But what if everyone's wrong? What if it's the system that is doomed to fail? Join me as I speak to some of the brightest people in the space and slither to the deepest, darkest depths of the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Welcome back, everyone. This is the fourth Meshtadel Monthly, and I'm joined again with Czino and Untapped Growth. It's not the best audio quality. Joel was actually on the side of the road. He broke down and still managed to make the call, but we had to do it over a mobile. So I've done my best with the editing, and I think it's still a fantastic show, definitely worth listening to. There's just a few parts in it where there's a little bit of background noise and things aren't quite as clear as we'd like. We'll definitely have to revisit some of these ideas. I really loved chatting to these two guys, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the future. I hope you enjoy the show, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. We're recording. Welcome back to our fourth Meshtadel Monthly. I've got Czino back, and today we have Joel, Untapped Growth, joining us from underneath a tree. This just shows how much he cares about pleb culture. He's broken down on the side of the road, and yet he is still joining to have this discussion. So welcome, and nice to speak to you for the first time, mate, via voice, and welcome to the show.
Pleasure, buddy. I'm glad to finally get the chance to connect.
Czino, welcome back. Nice to speak to you as always. We haven't really structured this, so Czino, maybe you have an idea of where you want to take this, but I'm going to probably take a bit of a back seat here. This is one where I want to really listen to some of the ideas that have been discussed over the last few days. It's fascinating stuff, and as anyone listening to this show knows, we are here to build and help this pleb culture, allow people to not only become more wealthy with their Bitcoin, but more healthy, focus on family, focus on food, focus on building connections between other Bitcoiners to create a better world. And that's really what the show's about. So, Czino, maybe you have some ideas where we kick this off.
Yeah, I have to be honest, I'm also quite unprepared. I'm super happy to finally talk with you in person, Joel. I always listen to most of the pods you're appearing, and it's always a pleasure to just sit back and listen to you talking, because you are a man, a true pleb in my mind. And just what you're doing is, I'm very inspired by that. I have to confess something. I think it might be a bit of a taboo sometimes in the Bitcoin space, because diet is also a big topic, but I'm mostly vegetarian. But being vegetarian, I can say that I really respect what you're doing. And if I would be eating meat, then I would definitely only choose cows that are raised in a way that you're doing it, because I really think that this is helping our planet, not this industrial raised cattle farm and bullshit. This is something else.
It's a privilege to be on with you, buddy. The whole reason I made time for this is because I knew they wanted to jump on with me and you. So when I saw your name, that's when I was like, okay, I'll make time. I'm in. This is it's an honor to know you, man. There's so many guys in the Bitcoin space that I really respect. You and Soul Exporter are near the top of that list. You guys are you're true men. They're the kind of men that I'm proud to be a part of as we're reshaping a new world together.
I co-sign that message. it's weird how you gravitate towards certain people, and you know the people who are really here for what's important. And yeah, Czino and Solex are two of my favorite Bitcoiners as well. Just
so much so.
Just work so hard, and there's no bullshit, no bravado, and always there to help people. So yeah, massive respect.
Yeah, if you guys remember when I dropped that first pod with Marty, when I said the plebs will inherit the earth, the kind of guys I was thinking when that was in my heart was guys like Sol and Czino. It's like they truly exemplify that part of that message. Guys with that meekness and integrity and that heart just for building together. So Czino, I'm curious, why vegetarian?
It started when I moved to Berlin, like first time getting out of my family nest, and I moved into a flat with a vegetarian, and she kind of got me into this. Like my first reasons were mostly environmental. Like I think that's still true. Like a lot of the industrial raised cattle and meat production is bad for the environment. Like anything that is industrial, like any industrial farming is bad for the environment. But this is how I got down this rabbit hole of starting to eat vegetarian. And I think that equally being and doing a good diet vegetarian and a good diet eating meat, both validity in this world. So I'm staying rather on the vegetarian path, like getting my proteins mostly from legumes, which is also convenient because in permaculture we're seeking leguminous plants because they put the nitrogen back into the soil. So I rather stay on that for now, and let's see, maybe living the homestead life it will change my mind, but as of right now I cannot see it.
Gotcha. I'm assuming, Max, you're a meat eater like the rest of the Bitcoin community, right?
Yeah, I'm not carnivore yet. I still do have my greens. I like broccoli. I like spinach. I'll still eat a bit of rice and bits and pieces, but mainly I'll try and eat meat and stay away from anything that's processed or high sugar or anything like that. I'm yet to speak to anyone who convinces me that all meat diet is the way to go, but I'm open to the idea.
Yeah, I'm not all meat either. I kind of follow like a Weston Price style diet. Do you know who that is?
No.
So he was a dentist, right? Kind of at the really getting rolling into the Industrial Revolution. There was still a bunch of indigenous people groups, maybe a dozen and a half, that hadn't been touched by the Industrial Revolution yet. So they still had been completely sequestered from the world, like some of the Inuits up north or some of the Polynesians down in the islands, like cultures that really didn't have much contact with the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And what he was seeing in his dental practice was that a lot of the modern people were having bad teeth structure, having lots of issues with cavities, having poor bone structure in their faces that made it harder for them to breathe, and lots of just secondary effects where they're more susceptible just to disease and all other sorts of problems. But when he was seeing people that came from these more indigenous cultures that followed their more traditional diets, they didn't need braces, they didn't have cavities, like all these things you thought these indigenous people groups would be more prone to struggle with because they weren't quote unquote modern, right? They didn't have any of the ailments of the modern man. So rather than like a lot of people do of being arrogant, he's just like, okay, I don't understand something, let's go study it. So what he did is he just traveled the world to all these different people groups of these nations that had not been touched by modernization yet, and sat down with the elders of their tribes. I was like, hey, what's your guys' stored tribal wisdom? What do you guys eat? What do you guys do when it comes to childbirth? What do you do for like health of treating these certain ailments? And just cataloged everything he could before it got lost in the oblivion of modernization. And what he found was there's a lot of just trends that all the people did in common. A lot of it was like wild caught fish at certain times of the year, or fish eggs. They had certain superfoods that he tested to find out they were high in vitamin K and vitamin A and vitamin D. Actually, vitamin K hadn't even been identified. He just named it X factor because he didn't know what it was until they figured it out later. He just saw something that was a pattern all these people were eating. And typically it was found in like animal products, pasture raised or wild caught from the ocean. They put a lot of effort into preserving those fat soluble vitamins. That way they could feed them to their peoples at key points in their lives, like the children or the women before they gave birth. Interestingly, a lot of them also fed the high nutrition diets to the men before conception. They believe that impacted the quality of the next generation as well. They also, most of the tribes had rules where like you had to wait 3 to 4 years between each child. which is kind of cool to let the woman rejuvenate her energy before bearing another baby. But yeah, he had all these different dietary and things that he discovered that just kind of had patterns. He wrote a book about it. So it's heavy meat, a lot focused on things that are pasture raised, wild caught from the ocean. But they do eat grains and things. He found the patterns of these tribal nations, but they all had methods of which they processed them to make them more palatable or like healthy for the human. So like the grains, they would sprout and soak them or like ferment them as a sourdough. And there's a lot of different things like a soy, like they would do different processes that actually minimized like the negatives of the soy and maximized what's good from it. It's kind of cool when you look back. There's a lot of people groups that like they were taught by the modern world that they were just wasting their time doing these things. Like I think of this one people group, I forget what it was. I think it was some sort of bark or something that was a part of their diet. And they had this elaborate process of like stripping it, soaking it. You soaked it and like dried it like 3 times. And there's this whole process you had to go through. And like the modern guys, like, why the hell are you going through all this work? Just do it once, you know? And none of the people in the tribe remembered why they were doing it. But everybody, the next generation started getting sick. It was a cumulative knowledge over like long periods of time, right? And when they finally went into research at using modern science, what they discovered is the traditional practice of doing those methods of processing actually was removing arsenic from the product that they were consuming. And so when they, with their modern arrogance, said that's not necessary anymore, they were actually circumventing the tribal wisdom that was happening over long periods of time that's too short to be discovered in a single generation, unless you had like, you knew what the right question was to be looking for it using modern science.
It seems that it's a recurring theme. There are a lot of ancient bits of wisdom and ancient practices that are disregarded by modern cultures. And actually, it's very important. And there's a reason that these things have been done this way for a long time. And it seems that we're sort of trying to go back to these practices, or a lot of Bitcoiners are, in lots of different disciplines in lots of different ways, but sort of going back to that family unit and going back to thinking carefully about how we do things and passing knowledge on to our children, which is really good. There's quite a weird noise in the background. I don't know if it's me or Czino or you, but it's like
it's probably me. Did it stop?
It stopped now. Okay.
That's me. I'm pacing. I'll have to mute between me.
Sorry, I'd normally edit it out, but I can't because we're on Zoom, so I only have one track of audio. But yeah, that's much better. But yeah, my point is just that this is what this show's about, is to talk about these kind of things and to make Bitcoiners stronger and healthier and smarter, and all these things that we can pick up will be useful. So I'll link that book in the show notes. That'll be handy.
Yeah, it's really cool, right? Because it's like Bitcoin teaches you to think in first principles again, which is leading to a renaissance of lost wisdom. Like in our modern world, the best description I have for it is like everything became a Tower of Babel. We thought we could ascend and become God and mechanistically control everything. I mean, Czino, you and I as permaculture lovers, we know like it's about discovering and creating space for the emergent order, right? It's like co-creating with stories that are larger than just you as the author. You're creating space for it, you're facilitating it, but it's not just you. It's you are collaborating. Go for it.
Exactly. It's like it's giving away control over how things are actually happening. Like in traditional farming, like the farmer tries to control everything to the minuscule parameter, like water amount and the nutrients they give in. Like they try to have everything under control, but that makes it so much more brittle. And we see that, like, especially when you compare capitalism, like true free capitalism, and then socialism, communism, like this spectrum of control. And I see that there is this pattern, especially amongst Bitcoiners, who recognize that you cannot just control everything from a central point. That's impossible. You cannot just be aware of everything that is happening, that's going on right now. So naturally, you should give up control and let the things organize themselves.
Yeah, it's like this assumption. You just assume with humility that you just don't know enough. I mean, no matter how much you learn, there's always unknown unknowns. So you apply a heuristic of a system that just takes that into account, where you don't have to know in order to create and rule well.
Exactly. The best rulers, they don't rule. They just let things happen naturally.
They're like cultivators, you know, it's like you facilitate it's almost like romance. it's like you're doing your part and telling that part of the story, but it's more like you're creating the landscape for the life itself to emerge beneath your care, but you're not the one who makes the growth happen. The growth is just something larger than you that you're in service.
Mhm.
I feel like Bitcoin's like that too, right? It's like this system of hard rules, but the rules are there because when you know the boundaries, the life can bloom in the midst of it. It's like when you have no boundaries, all you just end up with is chaos.
Yeah, well, that's the cool thing with Bitcoin is that you have the rules without the rulers, and you have certain things that you can't change or be very, very difficult to change. Beautiful new ideas can come from it because there's not like a constantly changing idea of what is or isn't acceptable or what isn't possible. It's just, this is how this works. You can then build on it or around it. And it kind of just means that things can be done in a much freer and more exciting way. That's one of the reasons that I get so excited about Bitcoin is I know how this is going to move. I know what my restraints are on a business or how I want to interact with it. And that's not what I see in normal world. You can start with a business or an idea, and then suddenly a regulation changes and it completely destroys everything that you've planned for the last few years. And that's a real pain in the ass. That's what's so different with this.
Yeah, that's what the whole ESG movement is, right? It's these top-down regulations that you're at the whim and fancy of those who write those rules and can change them at a whim, versus trying to create value in the world just based on what the market is openly telling you the truth is. That's something that us as business owners in this new crazy economy are going to have to really dealing with this just insane regulatory environment.
Yeah, it's weird because we still have, to some degree, we have to play by certain rules or find ways around them. And a lot of the time, I feel like we're living in the future in terms of we know how this should go, but we've still got one foot in the legacy system. And it's incredibly frustrating because you know that it's bullshit. You know that there's better ways because we do it, because we Bitcoin, but you can't just go. Like there's no one place, there's no one country where it just goes, right, this is Bitcoin country in the physical realm. It's different digitally, but where people just go, right, let's just fucking build. We're still tied to this shitty old system, unfortunately.
Yeah, that leads to something I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Gina. I've noticed a lot of people that I've gotten antagonism from about the project I'm working on, that it's like they see one facet of what I'm building, and then they assume that because I'm not controlling that facet to maximize optimization of like achieving it quickly, that like I don't know what I'm doing. But like what I keep coming down to is just realizing people don't understand the game that I'm playing. And I think that happens with a lot of us as Bitcoiners, or like even to another world, you and I interact in a lot, is the permaculture world. It's like people have these small critiques, not realizing that you take into account everything they're trying to tell you. You're just living in a world bigger than them. Have you noticed that too?
Yeah.
People that you attack Bitcoin or you talk to in your world? Because we're standing at the transition point. So it's really interesting. You see that divergence.
Yeah, what you mentioned, that happens also within permaculture. There are some groups within this whole community that some people say, oh, what you're doing, you're using concrete. Oh, this is not permaculture. Or somebody else uses a big fat machine to dig the swales or the dams, and they say, oh no, you're putting CO2 in the air. That's not permaculture. But in the end, like, it counts what the result is. If you use a lot of energy up front, of course, yes, it's a lot of energy. But if you can provably design it in a way that this huge upfront energy cost is then stretched out over the course of hundreds, if not 1,000 years, then this energy expense is minuscule. But some people, they have a certain idea of, in this case, permaculture, how it should be. And then they feel entitled that when other people do it differently than them, then that's wrong. And they need to be negative about that. And the same, I think, that happened also in your business, your undertaking, that some people assume that, oh, if you now shit on ESG and you call it like communistic and whatnot, that you don't get funded by the rich people because they apparently play a different game. But I was thinking that there are not like only one kind of rich people that play by certain rules. There are also Bitcoiners, especially right now, who got immense wealth already, and I can see them actually being more excited about putting money in what you are doing because they see that it actually goes into a better direction.
Yeah, I keep having conversations with my girlfriend about like energy usage. She's very much against like modernization when it comes to like using fossil fuels and all that kind of stuff. And I've been trying to work on her with this idea that energy in of itself is just it's not a positive or a negative. It's like free will. Like if you try to say that humans can't use energy or shouldn't be using energy, what you're essentially saying underneath of it is humans shouldn't be free, which goes kind of the core of what I believe is that the limiting factor of anything we can accomplish as humanity goes back to the heart of mankind. Who are we as men and women, and what is it that we are trying to create? I mean, are we living in alignment with truth and beauty of being submitted to things larger than us? Or are we trying to build a Tower of Babel of a world that we just bend to our every whim and fancy to try to control an outcome without being submitted to the way things work? It's like a respecting of energy, just like we as libertarians respect free will, of knowing that everybody has a right to try, but then you judge things by their outcomes of what is that person actually creating with their will or with their energy. And then that includes not just like physical energy, what you choose to do with your life, but like even energy of what you spend with like fossil fuels to dig swales, because in the long run it pays back, right?
Yeah, like of course there's some people who we could say that they waste energy if, for example, they let a light bulb running by accident in a cellar, and nobody's there. But I think every intentional use of energy should be permitted under the idea of freedom. Like people, they don't just spend energy because they don't want to. They spend energy because they get a use out of that. And this whole energy debate, like if we can just pinpoint that you cannot just judge what is good and bad energy use, then this whole debate falls to pieces, because this is the foundation it lies on. Mm-hmm. Saying that using energy to mine Bitcoin is bad just because you don't see the value in Bitcoin, well, it's not valid. Bitcoin has immense value for the right people.
And it shouldn't even matter anyway whether it does or doesn't, because who is one person to make a decision over somebody else? It might be that what you're doing right now doesn't produce anything that others deem useful, but it might be a project that takes a long time and then becomes incredibly useful to a lot of people. And if you can't experiment and try things that other people think are weird and different or are not of use, then we're never going to progress as a society, because most of the most interesting and most useful inventions, I think if you ran it past the average person, they'd probably say that that person's crazy and it's a waste of time. If we start limiting what people is allowed. Sorry, say that again.
Like the airplane,
yes.
They told the right the day before, like humans will never fly, and then the next day they're out there flying.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like I think it's even worse than that, because what it comes down to is like a codependence, saying that I have the right in my limited understanding to say I understand everything you do and tell you what you're allowed to do with your free will. Which that's an infringement on base humanity. I mean, that free will, I'd say that's that slice of the divine in us. That's that gift of what makes us different. And if we say, because all energy is just leverage to implement your will with a greater depth and reach. So when we try to say that you are not allowed to use your will as you see fit, you're directly stepping upon like the divine aspect of people's humanity that's around you. It's like you're dehumanizing them from a position of codependency, where it's like you have the right of God over that person to say what their will is valid or not about.
It's a dangerous theme that I see playing out, not just with energy, but with lots of things that are going on in the world, is people believing they're smart enough to control complex systems, and they're not. It's not only that they're not smart enough, it's not right to even think about doing it, but it does seem it's getting more and more normalized. And, you know, with the conversation that you had with Marty and also the one that he'd had with Sailor and everything, it annoyed me that people got on his back, because I actually really respected him standing up and saying, literally, fuck ESG. Let's not try and go along and play games and be the nice guy. Like, we know that ethically and morally what we're saying is correct. It is, I think, maybe a dangerous thing to allow these lies to continue. Like we have to battle these stupid ideas or work together to show that actually it's ludicrous to come up with these sort of ideas and control these sorts of things. It's just straight up wrong.
Agreed. It goes back to, like, at its root, this whole communism Marxist thing is a declaration that people around us are not worthy of being truly human, of having free will that God placed within us. It's a judgment upon them as being inferior, which to me is just an incredibly arrogant assertion that's unequivocally false.
Czino, what's your thoughts on this whole ESG thing?
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines, like, Bitcoin showed us that we are able to just step out of the system. We don't have to play that game anymore. And I think, okay, Joel, you're trying to play the game and try to break it from the inside. I hope if you do this works out and it just breaks down this whole house of cards. I wonder, are there also ways to not play this ESG game? Or as soon as you're a registered company, you are forced to play by the rules? What you were talking about, it sounds very familiar if you have read The Sovereign Individual and how they envision that in the future, the government structure will be broken down into smaller city-states. This sounds very similar to what you were just saying, like corporation instead of governments actually running specific areas. And I really like this idea of just being able to say, well, I don't like your rules here. I'm able to move somewhere else, and it might be just 100 or 200 kilometers away, and it's much better place because it's a completely different city state. If it turns out that Bitcoiners are actually able to build this, oh my God, I wish I would be able to see that in my lifetime.
I've been discovering something. It got triggered by Soul Exporter because he's been doing a lot of talking about this idea of a Meshtadel. Who actually was the originator of that idea? Was that Soul who's been pushing that?
Yeah, that's his one. And his son.
His son.
And his son. Got it. Okay, so I was trying to work on building the structure that I'm building with this cattle co-op, right? I should probably sync you guys up some of what I'm even building first. So like the original vision, as I talked about it with Marty and Dallas on the podcast, doing the nonprofit, doing the peer-to-peer matchmaking of like these decentralized agreements between individual parties where I just kind of help facilitate them to make them successful, doing the open source toolkit of everything they need to do this. That's all still going. But the deeper I've gotten into this, the more I've realized that like this needs to be a network of organizations. I won't get bogged down the weeds of explaining all the whys about that. But like, let's just say that essentially what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to play the same games the elites do, using like nonprofits and then for-profit companies and corporations and funds and all these different kind of modern tools that they use to leverage against the little guy to support their control and rent seeking from the top. But I'm going to play those games to destroy the game and make the guy at the bottom free again, to make the marketplace actually be what we as Bitcoiners believe it should be, this emergent place of freedom where the individual is sovereign again, the family and the community is what's sovereign, rather than being subject to the whims of a controlling state organization, regulatory structure, right? Okay, so as I've been getting into building this group and network of companies and different organizations that I need to kind of bridge together to take this larger mission, because it always from the beginning, right? I said cattle comes first, everything else comes second. My mission statement's always been facilitating the emergence of the citadels. Cows was just the best place to start that because soil is your first productive asset, and securing the food supply is the first thing you need to start building communities of a new parallel society, right? So I'm working. I got the nonprofit that we've already got up and live. We don't have IRS approval yet, but everything backdates compared back to when we filed. So that's all going. I'm working on building like a for-profit company that's going to be like a supplier of all the goods and services needed to build these little ranches and kind of get the communities going, as well as kind of intelligence type stuff of consulting services and maybe even on-site installations of like fencing and water lines and wells and all that kind of stuff. I And I'm also working on building a financial arm that is going to give us leverage to attack the tactical things we need to build out the Citadel network. Because the whole world's so broken, it's not really like business anymore, right? Like we were talking earlier about ESG stuff. ESG, what they're doing is they're foregoing profit for the sake of cozying up to those with power who control the money printer, right? So you're going against your financial incentives because of the fact that it gets you closer to the political system. So we, on the other side, as the freedom lovers, we need an ability to do the same, because we need to be willing to say that like we have to treat this like war, not business. We have to be willing to say this isn't just solely about money. Like, this is about the freedom of the next generation, which is going to yield untold wealth, but it may not even accrue to me, right? It's like that, like the J.J. Hill thesis of when I build the network that makes the world more successful, it makes some of that of value accrue to me in a way that'll be worth it. So there's no place for people to do that currently. And with the cattle co-op, my goal's always been to be a place where we can strategically attack those things, to create a world where communities and the sovereign individual is brought back to preeminence. And any questions on that? Is that a good loop in on where I am so far?
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Okay. You with me, Czino? Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I've gotten into as I've been working on building this whole thing is that we're leaning forward so strongly into a new world that the old structures of using bureaucratic controls of enforcing contractual leverage against one another is so bogged down with distrust that it doesn't have that fluidity of emergent collaboration that enables you to create value in the way that we need to be able to do. It's so bogged down with trying to have power over one another that there's no space to be creative and actually maintain unity as brothers and create the new world, right? So I've been sitting back and kind of trying to think about this, of how in the world do I do this? Because it's much like we talk about in permaculture world. Like, you can try to control all the inputs to raise perfect plants, but like, they're not machines. Really what you have to do is you got to cultivate the emergent order by creating the space in the landscape that kind of shepherds it to where you want it to go, but in a way that you're allowing it to have its own part in telling the story versus trying to mechanistically, like Keynesian economics, right, dictate it all from the top down. And so I was trying to bring that perspective to, like, how do I build a business organization with this network of companies? And I had that thought trigger, as all of us were chatting actually with Soul Exporter, of the way that if we lean towards this whole sovereign individual thesis of the free city states and the individual having the sovereignty to move between them to go wherever his beliefs are most aligned with, of what if this isn't just something that's off in the future? What if this isn't something that's just geographically grounded in one solid space in the physical realm? Like, we're in a digital world. We can collaborate digitally now. Like, my team of guys I'm working with, they're not just all over the country, they're all over the world, of people that want to work with me because they believe in the way we're trying to make the world a better place together. So what if we just went towards this idea of the sovereign city states and what we're building? What if, like, rather than having these complicated charters of all these rules and orders of operations, what if we just set this thing up like one of these places? Like Saifedean talks about, he thinks monarchy is one of the best forms of governments because it front loads all the risk and all the trust to say, like, okay, there's this person leading, this is what they believe in. Do I agree with them or not? Right. So what if we got back to corporations more being like tribes like that, where rather than the person leading the tribe trying to use leverage to force everybody to have to follow what he wants, and then them having to use leverage and power to force him not to be able to misuse them, what if we just gave everybody freedom? What if we just said, when I'm raising the money or building the, like, financial arm for this network, in addition to, like, the nonprofit and the businesses and stuff that'll be collaborating, what if we just said, like, okay, here's the mission, here's the person who's running it, let's either you trust this guy or you don't, and then when he has something that's supposed to be done with the funding, he goes and he explains it to all the people that are a part of this group. It's a tribe, like you can call them, say, members of the organization. He's the executive. And they get to say one of four things. They can say, like, so these are all people who put capital in and are also collaborating on kind of accomplishing the mission. People who've really taken ownership of believing in it. They're not just money people, right? They're bringing their own advice and creative abilities and network and whatever they have in the world with them. So he has something he thinks is needed for the big group of the organization where the financial arm is going to go after a project. Say, for example, I've realized trying to build the cattle co-op that with the scale of the number of farms we're going to try to do, there's not enough cattle of the right bloodlines that have this low input, deep resilience in them to really stock all the farms. We're going to buy out every cow eventually in North America within the first couple of years and not have any left. So we need to go after some tactical projects that may not maximize profit, but say, like, I had a guy who's a mainstream cattle breeder reach out to me. He's been doing it for generations and his family's been stuck on the hamster wheel. He's also a Bitcoiner. He was like, hey, I didn't know how to get off the hamster wheel until I heard your podcast with Marty and put it all together. Like, if you help me get off the hamster wheel using this network of peer-to-peer matchmaking to have an investor with the land and the different things you guys already know about, I can bring to the table artificial insemination, doing surrogates with animals. We can import genetics from other nations and like harvest eggs and put them into like mothers of different cows to raise these numbers at a much greater scale, because we can use cows that are modern cows, but put in eggs and semen from ancient cows and scale up your cattle numbers more quickly. So say he's got this project, he goes and pitches it to all the members of the organization. Okay, so all the members get to say, does this match the mission statement of why I'm here, of believing in this guy and his mission that he's brought us together for? And so when he brings it to them, they'll say either, yes, I assent, I'm in this. I'm going to bring all my resources, not just that are already invested in this organization that I brought in up front, but like my wisdom and my network of my allies and everything I can do to help make this one successful. There'll be others that say, like, I like just no statement, like I don't agree or disagree, but I'm still with you. There'll be ones that say, like, I disagree, I dissent, but I'm still here. I'm not going to leave over this. I'm going to still be a part of this organization because I believe in what you're doing for the long haul, even though I disagree in this one case. Or they can say, like, I disagree and this is a big enough deal. I'm going to leave the organization and part ways with you guys because of it. And so those statements, they're not like votes. They're front loading the unity of the tribe. That way, the leader of the tribe can make a decision and truly lead. He can say, we're all on the same page here. Like, this is worth me going out and doing, or this is something that my people don't like. And then from there, he can make good decisions. This inherently, like Saifedean talking about monarchies, it limits his power as the leader, because if he does things that doesn't respect the mission and why all the people are there, the organization will just fracture and they'll go somewhere else to with their capital and their resources to somebody who does. Does that make sense as a model so far, guys?
Totally makes sense. This reminds me of something, and I think it could really support setting up this kind of thing. I don't know, have you heard of the corporations of Mondragon?
I have not.
So let me just explain a little bit. So Mondragon is a region in Spain, and there are a lot of companies in that small region that have the custom that if you want to work in that company, you have to put some part of capital up front. So you're also a stakeholder of that company. And, you know, when the financial crisis happened in 2008, 2009, of course, all companies did bad, but the corporations of Mondragon, they kept fairly steady. Like, they were not suffering that much because they had the backup of their workers and they were part of making decisions. Like if it was, for example, about, okay, sorry guys, we have to cut now our loans. Most people were part of that decision, and that's why they kept working the way they were working. So that makes the whole company structure much more resilient. And coming back to your idea, that would actually be probably the foundation of making this happen. People can decide if they abide by the decisions of the leader or not, and leave based on that, because they would get also, of course, they would get their capital back. And with that, they also have a cushion. and are free to take the time to look for something else.
Exactly. Because like when I got into this, right, it was like I was trying to solve the very things we solve when we organize people with government structures, right? Should it be a democracy? Should it be a republic? Should it have a bicameral voting house? Like, we know all the problems of all those things. And it just got me back to thinking of the first principles where I agree with safety. Like, let's put a man in charge. It loads everything into, like, the real problem is we need men with good hearts. So the men with the good hearts that most people trust will be the ones that rise to the top. The ones that aren't trusted will sink to the bottom. And so if we can make that very liquid in a digital world versus like the monarchy argument in the long run is you can kill the monarch, and that's how you maintain the liquidity in the governance structure to make sure bad kings don't rise. In this case, you got the capital and the digital connectivity of the organization as a liquidity. So being a bad king gets punished really quickly. Being a good king, you rise to the top because you slowly have more and more people who enjoy being a part of your tribe. It's like governance structures don't just have to be geographically grounded nations anymore. We can collaborate digitally with an impact on the real world.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big breakthrough for me to think about that. Go for it.
I wonder if we could maybe demonstrate this on a practical example. I don't know if we could, for example, use crypto cloaks as just like a theoretical company that would do this split into more a decentralized company. What would they need to do to make this happen? You know, I think it would be interesting to look at it that way.
So the thing that I'm thinking differently from like those companies in Spain that you're talking about, right? Like they all get to vote on what to do with the loans. So it's like they have some sort of democratic process where like they have some bureaucratic complexity, which just slows down the whole process. What I'm thinking is like it truly puts all the decision-making power in the hand of the executive, but it's an executive who can get punished very quickly if he doesn't defend the trusted collaboration among peers. And so when he brings in the people, he gets to set with each of them peer-to-peer as individuals, the trust model of like, okay, here's the withdrawal rules for your capital. Here's the lockup period for your capital if you're going to be a part of this. That way he's not bogged down as a decision maker, right? Like he knows what his access to funding and resources are for a certain time period. But over the longer periods of time, if he doesn't maintain unity, he loses access to all the capital, right? Mm-hmm. So it enables more strategic, like more like we were talking about with the sovereignty and supporting the family, like a small community type fund here. It's more about war than it is about business. I mean, we're not just trying to make money. We're trying to subvert the whole ESG and Marxist push here. So like when you're trying to go into war, you don't want too many heads making the decisions. Like if you try to have a democracy run a battlefield, you can't maneuver fast enough and you end up just getting just dogpiled, right? Mm-hmm. But with this kind of model that more almost resembles a monarchy, you're front loading the trust and the risk, but in a way that's on the time scales of these long time frame projects we're talking, gets punished very quickly because the people are very liquid in the way you design it. Just like free market money, right? With Bitcoin, where it punishes you for making bad decisions. But this is in a human organization type punishment, right? Where people will leave the tribe. But you don't lose your tactical decision making of your ability to implement decisions quickly. And in the long run, it gives you some time, because even if you make a decision that everybody dissented, but they didn't say they'd revoke their money from or like their membership of the group with, you may prove to have been right. And then you actually create a stronger tribe because now they trust you more and they'll listen better next time when you bring something, and you'll all learn more better how to be more effective in the world. So it's a little different. Yeah, it's a little different than just business, because that's the problem I was running into, because what I'm building is not business, it's war.
You can come up with an idea and then people can see that it was good and realize that actually you are a good leader in the way that you're doing things. And maybe you just think about things in a different way rather than having to try and coerce or force people to do what you want. You're building it more on trust and that people will follow you. And it sounds much more efficient because, like you said, you know, you have too many decision makers and things can get really messy. It's like you try and create a painting and say to 20 people, right, this is your little part, this is your little part, this is your little part. Let's make something beautiful together. And it's going to be a fucking mess. You're much better off having someone who has a vision and can steer it towards that vision.
And just let them lead. So to be clear, what I'm trying to build, I'm not going to lead it all. what I'm trying to build is a network of tribes of people that have alignment. So like have one guy running the for-profit company that's going to help build the infrastructure of the new emergent Citadel ranches. Have somebody running the nonprofit, which is going to do the education and the peer-to-peer matchmaking and the community outreach and a lot of those pieces. Have this financial arm that's going to work to bring together the capital that's going to support these tactical opportunities needed to help emerge the Citadels. And I envision each one of those being run by a guy other than me. So like I'm at the top kind of helping direct strategy over all these organizations would be my vision. But like the unity of these guys is me drawing them together with freedom of their own consent, where it only actually works if me as a leader directing strategic vision of all of them, pick good guys to lead each of them. And I'm directing things in a way that all these different guys doing the different parts also still believe in, right? So it's almost like a tribal group where the tribes come together for war when it's needed, but they also are just doing their own thing independently and in a way that's organic and most efficient when there's nothing like that needed at a larger scale. So once again, it shrinks the size of the power structures, just like we think about the sovereign individual at the city states.
What I wonder, how are the leaders coming into being within a structure? Especially when somebody steps down, I suppose he recommends somebody else, but otherwise, probably if you're starting your business and you're becoming part of those tribes, I guess, then you're already in the central role. So maybe that could work.
Yeah, so these are all the details I got to work out. So this is the big structure. And then like you have your capital lockup and your withdrawal rules, which will be negotiated with each person. You have what happens when somebody says like, I support this, or a no statement, or I dissent, or like this is worth me leaving over. Like if they say and they agree to kind of help bear the cost of making it successful, like maybe they should reap more of the rewards somehow. And those who dissent but like don't withdraw their capital, like maybe they should get less of the rewards or be insulated from the consequences somehow if it ended up being bad. And all these little details will be really interesting, but I think they're all solvable. But yeah, the succession stuff is definitely a big one. My current thinking will be that like we raise a banner of saying, hey, this is the guy who's got this mission. We as a community have seen him live for a long time. We trust him. Here's what he's going to be doing of his clear mission statement. Who wants to be a part of his mission with him? And so then you got this whole method where he gets punished if he gets out of alignment because people just part ways because you left them liquid, which it's great because it makes you accountable as a leader. Like you're not divorcing yourself from the friction that forces you to keep having to grow and learn. But keep the idea of front loading where he's just in charge, where people that join it new, he gets to bring them in or decide who gets to join. And when it's passed on to the next person, he gets to be the one who just like essentially gives his inheritance to the next guy who's going to be the lead. And the same punishment model works because if he picks somebody bad, then all the capital leaves and the people go join a different organization they believe in better, who had a better leader pick for it. Or they go raise a new banner and pick a new person, the leader they believe in more.
Are you thinking with this leveraging the Bitcoin network and using contracts and using Lightning and like sort of trying to find a way where people can see where capital moves? Or are you thinking that it's still some of this stuff would have to remain in the legacy system for some reason? Like, do you see anything that's happening in Bitcoin now that might help with some of these ideas and make it more secure and more, I guess, visible and transparent?
Yep. So as of now, I'm trying to straddle between the two worlds, right? Old world and new world. So I'm going to use some sort of legal structure. Currently, what the guys on the legal team are leaning towards as we're working on this is using LLCs. But the downside there, right, is the state authority with their monopoly on violence is the one who's responsible for enforcing the agreements, right? But I've already been leaning towards thinking what you're thinking here, Max, of like, if we use smart contracts and multi-sig wallets and like now you can have this whole world where there's so many different little things, right? Like right now with an LLC, the one who's in charge of even saying who I am and if I'm allowed to do business is the state. Like what if they say that I can't form an LLC with members who have not been vaccinated and don't have a medical ID as a part of this digital communist system, right? Like what if I want them to be a part of my LLC? Like, well, they said I can't, right? They're in charge. Versus if we had this set up with some sort of pseudo-anonymous thing where you have an ID that's grounded to Bitcoin somewhere, then like reuse snore signatures, so you can't tell what's multi-sig and what's not. You've got privacy respected. You can't tell if it's just a normal wallet or somebody being a part of a more complex organization. And then you leverage some of these smart contracts and stuff to create whatever we're doing with the lockup periods and withdrawal rules. Like one thing I was thinking, some of the detail type stuff, right? Like imagine if somebody assents to the projects that it creates a new lockup period for a certain percent of their capital or something, because it's like skin in the game. They said this is a good idea. They believe in it as being a part of the mission. So now you have more liquidity locked in the organization for a little longer, right? So it gives the leader of the organization a little more resource security to just continue waging war, right? Versus if you like don't give assent, maybe like it changes your lockup period or something, right? I'm thinking kind of stuff like that. There's so many details I still need to work out. I love Chino's question. I think if we sat down, me, Chino, Sol, and a bunch of the different guys just talking about this, we'll be at the founding fathers, man. We're going to just brainstorm a whole new constitution, because that's really what this comes down to. It's like we're building the structures of a whole new world. But
Well,
yes,
the beauty of your approach is, like you said in the beginning, like you don't have to rule everything from the beginning and making the perfect plan, because there will be situations differently for each new company that is forming or joining the tribe. So I think the best approach might be just to give a template or general direction from which we can then all build upon. So
exactly.
you don't have to figure out each little detail, because this will then be dealt by the individuals that are involved in that particular instance.
Exactly. It's like what I'm trying to define is what the structure looks like of the emergent landscape that we're kind of living in, and then where the knobs and controls are of the things that can be tweaked so that people can use them to build what they want to build. It's almost like like when the US Constitution was written, that we became the template for democracy of the next 250 years, for good or for ill. I think with a lot of what us Bitcoiners are currently leading towards, of building these kind of new structures for a new world of how we organize people into this Meshtadel type thing, right? Like we're building the new templates that are going to define the next epoch of humanity. It's stuff that's worth putting the time in to get it right. We're not just playing the game of let's make a lot of money at building successful businesses here. We're setting the patterns of the path dependencies of what's going to be the new world.
Yeah, definitely the mindset of we're waging war right now, I think, helps in that case, because we have to think adversarial, and there are people who don't want to see us succeed.
Absolutely. More so that don't want us to succeed than those that do. Definitely. We're stripping away the one ring of power from those who have used it to enslave humankind. We have to play the game. We have to be as cunning as serpents, but as innocent as doves. We have to put the power back into the hands of the individual, and being intelligent in how we do this. It's not just going to be magic. There's a part of this that's altruistic, of us being willing to take risks to do so, just like they try to do this out of selfishness. We do this from a perspective of good. We invest ourselves into it.
It's particularly nice if you're using Bitcoin and some of the things that we're discussing, like if you are using contracts or time locks or any of these things, when they're agreed, it's an agreement that you can prove is going to play out. Whereas in the current system, it seems that it's just who has the best lawyers, who has more money. It's like a proof of stake kind of system. And whenever I'm entering into an agreement in the traditional finance world, I know there's a large chance that I'll get fucked if someone wants to take advantage, someone who has better lawyers. And you kind of just have to take that lying down. It makes you not want to invest in things often or do things, even if you do think it's a great idea. Whereas with this, I'd feel much more confident, because I know that when this agreement is written up, it has to fucking play out. It has to stay within the rules that we've agreed. And it means that everyone can be away from battling each other and focusing on the real enemy and making real changes, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like the whole fiat world, it incentivizes this, I want to call it politics, but it's more just like codependency. It's like, let's keep everybody happy, and those that are willing to be the most disruptive are the ones who can win. But like goodness and truth don't matter. Like you think about what Craig Wright's doing to some of the Bitcoin developers, right? Going and doing these lawsuits for defamation or whatever bullshit he's up to. And our current system, the cost to create bullshit is just super, super low. Like, it's not even like, can he win a court case? It's like, is he willing to just pick a fight because it's going to have a cost that's so high for the person he's picking the fight against that it already accomplishes what he wants, causing disruption.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Versus-
bothering me the most.
Yeah, it's terrible. I fucking hate it. But like in the system like this, if we front load the risk of just saying these are men we're trusting, these are the ones we're behind, but the whole system's liquid, that if they step out of line to the mission or do things we don't support, the liquidity flows away from them. Like, it's going to have a momentum to it where you can't just fuck with them. You can't just use state power because they're the one you trust to maintain social cohesion and consensus to use their bureaucratic messiness against people that are actually trying to do the right thing. You have to go up against, like you're saying, Max, if we really built it into a smart code system, you have to try to break the software itself, because the only attack surface is the people who believe in the person they're supporting. And if they believe in them, they're not going to be fragile. You just have to take them out somehow or go and lie to them. But in a community like this, as we just proved with the plebs the last couple of weeks, and the truth is very durable. Like, it just, when you're in a community with a heart that really cares about this stuff, you build deep relationships that it's really hard to cast deception into it in a way that just doesn't get shredded.
You only get one chance. You only have one reputation. It's not like you can just go bankrupt, go and start a new company and spin some more bullshit. If you're in this Bitcoin community and you fuck around, you're not coming back.
Well,
It's funny.
you
it's
can
funny
just create
too,
a
though.
new nimble,
You
but
can
you
sure
have to start
try.
from there at zero.
Yep, exactly. But the real cool thing, Max, though, is that yes, you don't get a second chance, but at the same time, there's a resilience against dishonesty, because it's based upon real trust and real relationship, where there can be stuff spread about people around the community and it doesn't necessarily penetrate until it shows out to have been who they really are. It front loads everything back to this human connectivity again. But in this time, rather than being a small town of us having like a blacksmith and a butcher that like we have relationship with, and we know the kind of people they are, we're doing it in a decentralized, distributed manner. I find it really beautiful because it makes truth and integrity matter again. It's like you're, rather than legal contracts being the adhesion that holds the system together, it's honor that holds it together. Honor's become the glue again in relationship, rather than state power of being able to enforce legality.
That's something that's really, really missing in today's society, and it's wonderful to see it in these communities. It's amazing to see it matter again, because, like you say, it's such a shame it doesn't seem to matter, and no one seems to value it or respect it, and that's very, very wrong.
I find it super interesting how we technologically advance, but then we, at the same time, we're going back to our roots of what it means being human. I like that we somehow managed to just close the circle and go back to where we started.
Yeah, it's like we got farther away from each other when we industrialized and globalized across the world. But now we get to have that energy leverage of industrialization, but go back and combine it with a distributed localism based on relationships again, because that's what clear communication with good money like Bitcoin does.
To come back to waging war and being strategical about it and resilient, one small piece of literature I would like to recommend is Bill Mollison, one of the founding fathers of permaculture. He also thought about a lot of like how to build communities and companies in our current legal system. And he derived a way setting up like at least 2 trusts that minimizes the attack vector on your companies to a minimum. And if you just Google it and look for Bill Mollison and the 2 trust system, I think you can find some interesting things to read through. And maybe it helps you also in drafting out your idea a bit clearer, how we can turn over the system.
That's exactly what I'm looking for, stuff like that. Because what I want to do is transition to a world where the monopoly on violence becomes irrelevant and human consent of trust and relationship is what matters again. I'm trying to lean towards that to kind of I don't know, kind of wear the trail in the road a little bit, hoping everybody else will follow me.
It feels more and more like it's possible as time goes on and these communities grow and Bitcoin as a network grows and becomes more capable as well. And also at the same time, people who are spending their time and energy in this and holding Bitcoin as an asset, they are becoming more wealthy and therefore more able to make these ideas reality. And so it feels like we are on the cusp of something massive. And that's why it's so important that these discussions happen. You know, I'd love to see something actually in the real world where we could trial it with, which, Czino, you were sort of touching on earlier, saying, you know, what's a way to trial something like this and give something a go and then build from it.
I'll be trialing it as soon as I get some of these ideas on paper, because I've got people wanting to put money into this group. We're going to do the tactical side of acquiring properties, like for the cattle breeder guy and stuff like that. And I just have to come up with a vehicle that works. And we've got funds raised already of guys who just want to partner with us. So it ain't going to take long. As soon as I have these ideas fleshed out, we're live.
I was just thinking that the trust thing that Bill Mollison described, like calling this thing a trust, I find it very peculiar that this is a recurring theme in our Bitcoin community, that we talk about that we need to build trust among each other, but at the same time, we are utilizing a trustless money, like, you know, don't trust, verify. But this contrast is something sometimes to think about how marvelous that is. Like, speaking of opposites.
Yeah, I love that, because now it's no longer is the trust list of the money distorting the information so badly that you can't tell how trust in the human relationship even matters at all anymore. It's removing the trust component from the money so that all of your focus can be on the trust of the relationship. It's putting the trust in the one place that actually matters. The information and the money's clean. So now what matters is, what am I using that money to communicate or collaborate with peer to peer?
Totally agree.
Which goes to something you were talking about earlier, Max. With my guys, some of my core team members with the cattle co-op network I'm building, a bunch of my core people were thinking I was crazy when I was wanting to publish that thing I wrote for the plebs of just putting my hand in their fate on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. That was like a week, 10 days. I don't even know when that was. They were like, man, like, you've got this web woven around you. Like, you got no legal leverage whatsoever. And I was like, guys, like, you don't get it. Like, my brothers here, these plebs, they care about one thing, and that's integrity and honor. It's good faith. Are we building trust and working together? They're like, but yeah, these guys are all about trustless money. And like, they don't care about building a relationship. I'm like, you don't get it yet, guys. I'm going to tell the truth, even though I'm buried, and the truth is going to be really hard to see. And these men will shake out the truth and show what's really real, because they're going to pursue what is the path of integrity and honor. And they were like, okay, your call. I think when you do this, it's going to burn everything down. What you're doing is going to break because you chose to take this path versus just ignore it and not stir up the friction. And because that's what most of my people were telling me to do, was just like the whole fiat thing, right? Like, fiat's based upon this world of just distortion. It's let things stay in the shadows and don't ruffle feathers too much, because you might lose connection to the money printer. So we pander and are codependent, and that's just not me. And it's not who we want to be in the Bitcoin future. We want to be people who live in the truth. We just turn the lights on. We let it shake out where it is and trust each other to be men who pursue that truth. And so I just tossed my fate into the hands of the plebs, trusting that they had a heart for truth. And it was scary and beautiful at the same time, because like, I know guys that I'm trusted in. Like, I know the heart of guys like Czino and Soul, where like, if I'm wrong, they're going to tell me I'm wrong, and they're going to stop supporting me, and it'll burn me down. Mm-hmm. But if I'm right, even if it's hard to see, they're going to dig until they find it, because we have enough relationship where they're not going to just write me off very quickly. Like, they're going to take the time to look. And that's precisely what happened, right? Like, I told the truth on Twitter. I wrote the story just exactly what it was, just factual. Didn't editorialize, didn't try to like create any legal leverage or anything. I just spoke from a place of trying to live with honor. And the Bitcoiners dug. They found the whole history of everything, and the lights got turned on, and you guys know the rest of what happened from there. And it blew the mind of a lot of my core team, because they were like, okay, you were right again. Like, you trust these guys to cover your six because you said they value honor, and good Lord, they do. They found the truth that even us inside the organization, we lost some guys because they couldn't even see it, because it was just until the path the past stuff got dug out, it was really hard for people to really understand what was happening. So like when that happened, it just blew the mind of all my guys I'm working with. Like, this really is a whole new world. What's going to happen when honor really is the preeminent position again? And I'm like, you guys are going to find out.
Yeah, it's lovely that I liked where you said you don't want to ruffle feathers. You want to just keep things in the darkness. You just don't bring things up. And to start contrast to what you're doing and what plebs are doing is just like, let's just fucking go for it. Let's just put everything out in the open. Let's just see. And like you're saying, if you were bullshitting or if people didn't agree, they'll call you out on it. And so it can be scary, but it's just so much more efficient. It's so refreshing, and it's so different that it's maybe going to take people a little bit of time to come around to it, but fuck, it's lovely. I love the way that this whole space operates and that people do things. It just puts a smile on my face.
Yeah, I cried over it. It cut me to the core, especially hearing what some of the guys like Czino and his network was up to. Guys who just
yeah, I wish it was a bit more effective. Like I was looking at the specific lightning node, like how the connections are breaking off, but it stopped. So not everybody was convinced. I tried to talk to 2 people who I knew were connected, but they didn't listen to me. Maybe they didn't want to be part of all this drama. But some did. At least one of our rings where this person was part, completely exposed. Gone. But like to go a step back, when this whole ordeal was breaking out slowly, first and privately, and then before it even hit Twitter, and we were talking, like you explained me your side of the story, and I was also talking at the same time with the other person, and I heard both sides of the stories, and then I made up my mind, and I realized, wait a minute, what Untapped Growth is telling me seems way more plausible, because it felt way more like you're speaking from your heart, and it was more coherent in what you're saying, while the other side of the story, something just didn't seem right. I didn't have all the information, but I felt there was something wrong. And then after the whole thing then played out, I realized, yeah, my gut feeling was right about this. And trusting your gut sometimes goes much longer, a much further way than not trusting anybody.
Yep.
I don't know if I make sense there, but I think
yeah,
I think like you should give both sides a chance before you how's it in English called? You give your judgment, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Before you judge. But,
and I knew that when we were talking privately, like I could tell that like I was sharing it with you, we were talking, but like you hadn't decided. It was like we'd been brothers, we'd been tight for a long time, but you were going to wait until you saw it all. Mm-hmm. And I respected you for it. Man, he wasn't just jumping in just because we're friends.
Yeah, no, that could also be dangerous. Like imagine you have like so much clout, in quotes, that you could just burn somebody to the ground who didn't do anything. Not that I'm saying that you would do that, because I totally don't think that you're this kind of a person. But speaking of honor, reputation, and trust, this is something that also should not be abused. But the beauty of this community is that it is also hard to abuse this, because we have seen it a couple of times. Somebody built up reputation and then tried to gain benefit out of that, and it completely backfired.
It feels like we're really on the cusp of something great here. I'm really enjoying hearing the ways you're thinking about putting it together and making it so that we can build these massive trust networks. I guess from my side, one question that I have running through my head is, and it's something that we've talked, Czino, me and you about before, is if someone comes to me and says, oh, I've got this project and I need someone for it for X, Y, and Z, I feel 100% comfortable saying, you can speak to my friend Czino for this, or you can speak to Solex for this, you speak to Mr. Crown for this, and I will 100% back and put my reputation on the line because I trust and know you guys. Is there a way that we can do this using the network, and so that it can be to a larger scale? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to ask there?
I think what's going to happen as we start building these new organizations around this kind of a paradigm, that's going to happen just organically. It'll like, you'll be able to have a whole trust model where your like social media presence is not just like your profile on Twitter, but it's the sum compendium of all your actions that you're doing in the real world that you want to expose publicly too, or that others who are interacting with you are willing to expose. Because if you have a wallet that's a part of these companies, that's your public facing like identity, then like your ethics of how you conduct these deals will be publicly known in the long run.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the internet. Information spreads very quickly, and you can just ask somebody about their opinion of somebody else. And even if they don't know, they can ask another person. You can just shout it out into the void of the Twitter space or elsewhere. And you can fairly quickly gather all the information you need. The only thing, and I think Bitcoiners are the closest to this, is having some form of verifiable digital identity. And a very recent example with Hodl Hodl and this whole debacle, people did not trust the communication because guess why? They did not have a PGP key. So a lot of Bitcoiners are doing this to prove that it's themselves who talk to you by just signing a message. And if we can combine this plus the internet, the web of trust, and our trustless money, I think we got the recipe right to actually kick this whole thing off.
Yep. And the thing to make it last is going to be maintaining our vibrant, rebellious independentness between each other as men. Where like just like you did with me, where you didn't just throw your lot in, you waited to like truly vet the situation with friction. Like some of the people around me are accusing me of the situation currently, that like everybody's just blindly following me and I stirred up a mob, you know, not realizing that that's not true at all. Like the risk up front everybody was concerned about was the fact that like you are giving away all legal power here and just trusting yourself to your community who you says will pursue truth, and you have no reason to believe they do besides you say you trust them. And then now at the end of it, they're saying like, well, you didn't pursue any legal power. You like, how do we know you're not just deceiving everybody? You know, it's like the way we know that works is because we as men who are a part of this community, we stand on truth above all else, right? It's not just about who we know and pandering to each other for political power, but like we did with Bitcoin, we've stood against the grain, against the current, because we believe there's a way the world's better when we are willing to be black sheep and pursue truth above all else. We can't let that falter as the community grows larger or even into the next generations.
No, I hope this community aspect stays. There are some people saying that Bitcoiners or Bitcoin Twitter that will just die out because Bitcoin becomes mainstream and becomes normalized. But I hope with it, this whole ideology, this whole way of living, it becomes also normalized. Because people, they just they start adopting this way of living. Like I didn't live like this before I discovered Bitcoin. I learned a lot through like being immersed in this community. And I hope that as Bitcoin grows, this community we are in right now grows with it.
I think it will. I think not just that, but we'll start growing from just these relationships on Twitter where we're defended against shitcoiners and doing all the stuff we currently do where we get to see people's character, or like standing for the messaging of truth, like against the ESG narratives or whatever else is happening, but where we actually are building things in the real world together. And it not just stays, but blossoms into something even greater as we implement it, where we'll have tribes of the strongest, truest, most honoring men rise to the top.
Oh man, guys, I'm so excited for the future.
Me too, buddy.
Well, we're going to make it happen. And yeah, I want to say thank you to both you guys for coming on, Czino for always being involved and helping push this pod and get ideas going, and Joel for everything that you're doing and for coming on here. It's a lot of food for thought, and I think a lot of these ideas can be explored in more depth. But I know that you are on the side of the road, Joel and Czino. I know you've got a lot going on, so I'm going to do my editing, get this out as quick as possible, because I think people will really enjoy this one. And yeah, just to say, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really look forward to seeing how these ideas progress and chatting to you guys again.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Absolute pleasure. Yeah, bus is fixed. I'm about ready. My friends are pinging on me to get back on the road. Can I give a shout out to Soul Exporter real quick?
Yeah.
So one of our buddies, man, that we talked about earlier in the podcast, I don't know if you'll keep that in the edit or not. Part of us who are all building this new emergent world, this hyper Bitcoinized sovereign individual where the power is more in hands of the smaller organizations and tribes rather than these massive state powerhouses. We all have our own role to play in that. Some of us are builders out stacking stones like Stoney. Some are ranchers out here raising cows like me. Some are coders and leaders like Francis building Bull Bitcoin. And the key to being a pleb who really is adding value to the world is do your job well wherever you are. It doesn't matter what that job is. It's do it with honor and do it to the best of your ability. And Soul Exporter is a guy that I really love. He's been really influential on me, not just like in a character and ethos thing that's helped shape me as who I've become in the space and me as a man, but also in the sense that like his little friction he's given me in dialogue as we've talked about problems I'm trying to solve has shaped my thinking in a way that the things I'm doing wouldn't exist without him. People like that, I think he underestimates the amount of influence he has on guys out here building things because he's a guy who's just thinking well and making us all better.
He definitely underestimates his impact. And me and Czino often have to say to him, no, don't talk yourself down. He's way too humble, that guy. Like he's a fucking legend. And I co-sign that. Absolute fucking legend.
So where I'll sign that off, man, like my heart for me is to just do well with integrity, the story that's in front of me, that's in my heart to live. And the men that I respect the most are those who are doing that as well, no matter what the story being told is. And it's an honor and a privilege to be doing it with all you guys, man.
Same to you, man. What you're doing in this space is just so valuable. Like you're leading a whole movement, like not only like a Bitcoiner movement, but also this mindset and bringing it to agriculture and the food production. It's such an integral part to being successful because without food, we would all not be here. And getting this thing right for citadels, especially when we ever build them, it's an integral part of being self-sovereign.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your days. Get home safe. And thanks again. Really enjoyed it.
Take care, you too. Love you guys.